The Washington Redskins opened their 1973 schedule against an old familiar wolf in unfamiliar colors. And Johnny Unitas and the San Diego Chargers suffered for all of the Redskins' frustrations, pent up since Washington's 14-7 defeat in Super Bowl VII. Biggs, Brundage, McDowell, Sistrunk, and Talbot sacked Charger quarterbacks 8 times, while allowing San Diego runners only 7 pedestrian yards and no points. On an afternoon when everyone was sensational, number 23, Brig Owens, and Verlin Biggs scored enough points to win, even if the offense had not compounded the felonious assault. The result was a 38-0 massacre, which soothed some ugly wounds from Super Bowl VII and brought the Redskins one impressive step closer to Super Bowl VIII. But the rout of San Diego may have been too complete. For the next week, the Redskins were upset by the Cardinals. For Billy Kilmer, it was an angry defeat, although he might have excused it by feeling that the team was flat. Men like Kilmer, whether up or down, healthy or hurting, accept the challenge of the game fully, even when the challenge is not to play, as it was for Billy the next week in Philadelphia, when Sonny Jurgensen tried to spark the Redskins' offense. Sonny put Washington in front and stayed in control, but it was the Redskins' defense that broke it open. Ted Vactor's interception and touchdown return completed the scoring at 28-7. But the Redskins' joy was overshadowed by thoughts of their impending showdown with Dallas. It was a Monday night meeting and a must-win game for Washington, but George Allen spoke only of how much the Cowboys wanted revenge after being beaten badly by the Redskins in last year's NFC Championship game. The Redskins wanted to run on Dallas, but they could not. The Cowboys wanted to open up Washington by throwing, but they could not. The Cowboys were long used to ruling the roost in their own division with very little backtalk. But then came George Allen, and Dallas was deposed, and now the proud Cowboys were out for honor. And this rawest of pro football rivalries was uglier, bloodier, and only more civilized than a cockfight. But aggressive mistakes by Redskins special teams allowed Dallas to retain the ball on 2 occasions in the first half. And at length, the Cowboys cashed in, Staubach to Stowe. Facing doomsday and trailing by 7, the Redskins' future once again wore the number 9. Extreme pressure from Jurgensen finally forced a Dallas mistake when Charlie Waters interfered with Charlie Taylor at the goal. And from the 1-yard line, Jurgensen hit Taylor in front of Waters to tie the game. On the very next series, pressure from the Redskins' rush forced another mistake, and Brig Owens zipped into the picture, intercepting a badly thrown ball by Craig Morton. And almost between breaths, the Redskins took the lead 14-7 with very little time remaining. Jubilantly, the Redskins rushed to Owens, releasing the passions built up through this toughest of games. And celebrating wildly, Washington nearly spent itself before the clock was expired. For Craig Morton rallied the Cowboys, and with 29 seconds still remaining, he stood facing 4th down at the Washington 4-yard line. Morton's play was a rollout designed to get the ball to Walt Garrison, a man so tough he played in the Super Bowl with a broken collarbone and gained more than 100 yards. And suddenly, as if in a cockeyed dream, there was Ken Houston restraining Garrison at the 1-yard line and throwing him back to preserve a victory that had been celebrated long before the final gun. In the 5th week, Norm Snead relived the horror of his stormy years in Washington. Only now, with the Giants, the Redskins were his tormentors. And Larry Brown, who delights in cutting the Big Apple boys to pieces, had a ripping afternoon, scoring 2 touchdowns to lead Washington to a 21-3 triumph. The following Sunday, the St. Louis Cardinals came to town with power line backing from Chris Hamburger and Dave Robinson in synchro mesh with Mike Bass, number 41, and the rest of the deep secondary. The Redskins deflated the Cardinals' air game and thus dismantled their high-scoring offense. Psych artist George Allen gave Billy Kilmer his first start since St. Louis upset Washington in the 2nd week. And Kilmer responded, completing 20 of 33 passes for 294 yards and 2 touchdowns, leading Washington to a 31-13 revenge victory. In Week 7, Washington traveled to New Orleans, and there they suffered an inexplicable 19-3 defeat by the Saints. And the next week, in a Monday night game, Washington quickly fell 2 touchdowns behind the Pittsburgh Steelers. But the veteran defense was unshaken, and with the help of Kurt Knight, the Redskins stayed within striking distance. Late in the game, Billy Kilmer connected with Larry Brown, and the Steelers' lead was narrowed to 21-16. And driving the Redskins, Kilmer brought them up the field again, only to see victory slip away at the goal line. Going into Week 9 after 2 consecutive setbacks, many of the faithful in RFK Stadium feared that injuries in the offensive line had slowed or sidelined too many key players. And without a running game, the Redskins were no longer real Super Bowl contenders. But George Allen said only that the team was 40 men strong and all they needed was a victory. Against the San Francisco 49ers, the Redskins justified George Allen's faith. Inspirational performances from Chris Hamburger and Pat Fisher sparked the Washington defense. And Billy Kilmer motivated the Washington offense, but later in the game, Kilmer was forced out of action with a damaged ankle. And Sonny Jurgensen took over smoothly to complete the much-needed 33-9 victory. Still, it was the defense at the darkest point of the Redskins season which turned the tide and brought them back alive. A well-muscled, resolute defense, a defense whose character one fan proudly advertised as meaner than a junkyard dog. But against a surprisingly stubborn Baltimore team, the Redskins needed 5 field goals from Kurt Knight to win. And in a season which had held some dark moments for Knight, his refusal to wilt under pressure in the psychological war that all good kickers must fight won him a bright reward which was the Redskins' 7th victory in the 10th game of the season. In fact, the special teams made consistent contributions to Redskin victories all season. Led by number 26, Bob Brunet, Washington Kamikazes blocked 4 punts and 4 place kicks in 1973, setting NFL records in both categories. And Redskin kickoff and punt coverage statistics were 3rd best and best, respectively, in the NFL. Number 28, Herb Mulkey, totaled more than 1,000 yards on kickoff returns alone. And all in all, the Redskins special teams personnel saw their duty and exceeded it. In Week 11, the Redskins traveled to Detroit for a Thanksgiving Day clash with the Lions in Tiger Stadium. And having survived their mid-season slump, they could see the light at the end of the tunnel. With a playoff berth almost within reach, the Redskins' offense, defense, and special teams combined to play practically a perfect game against the Lions. The result was Washington's 2nd shutout of the season and a 20-0 victory, boosting the Redskins alone into 1st place in the NFC East. The next week, the Giants came to RFK, and quickly, stunningly, they stepped out to a 21-3 advantage. Undaunted, the Redskins took the hard road back. But beginning the second half, Washington still trailed 24-10. Then Billy Kilmer was forced to give way to Sonny Jurgensen, and Jurgensen, with his shaky knee, wobbled on, as Kilmer, with his injured ankle, hobbled off. And the Redskins stood in imminent peril of losing all that they had worked long and hard for. With Kilmer gone and Jurgensen on a shaky knee and needing 17 points late in the game. The situation was so ridiculously desperate that Washington rose up and beat the New York Giants. Sonny was magnificent, directing 2 long touchdown drives. At one stretch, he completed 11 consecutive passes. But it never would have happened without Larry Brown. Rarely has the physical courage and raw will of a champion been so boldly displayed as it was by Larry Brown that day. It ended with the great All-Pro stretched half across the goal line, and with his teammates gathering him up just the way that he had picked them up to victory. And they were together literally covered in mud and glory. In the 13th week, the 2 gimpy quarterback system broke down, and Dallas beat the Redskins for the 2nd time in 5 games. And now both teams had to win the final game of the season so that the 2 hated rivals could share an unsatisfactory co-championship of the Eastern Division. The 14th week belonged to Lavig, Haas, Wilbur, Stock, Rock, Schunke, and Hermeling. The men of the offensive line who set Larry Brown free for 255 yards threw the Philadelphia Eagles in the mud for 4 touchdowns and a 38-20 victory. And just as the defense opened the season in sunshine and superlatives, the offense ended it looking super in the slop. Brown, Kilmer, Jefferson, and Haraway were the most visible until, caked in mud, they all blended together, and the offense was the star, as the Redskins took their 10th victory of the season to secure a playoff date. But for Billy Kilmer, who had checked out of a hospital to direct this victory, it was now back to the hospital and worrying about a strange and painful stomach ailment. In the land of fire and ice, the Redskins faced the Vikings in Washington's 3rd consecutive playoff appearance in the 3 years since the coming of George Allen. With the Redskins' running game at peak efficiency, Washington moved to a slim 7-3 halftime advantage. But Fran Tarkenton got loose once too often in the second half. And the Vikings took a 27-20 decision, ending the Washington Redskins season, and Viking fans celebrated as Redskin rooters sought reasons why. And some bitterly disappointed ones saw a parallel between Larry Brown's season and the Redskins season, saying both had been disappointing years. Yet Brown gained a combined total of 1,342 yards in 1973 on 40 receptions and 273 carries. He became the only active player to combine for over 1,000 yards in 5 straight years. And in carrying for 860 yards, he became one of only 3 men to rush for more than 5,000 yards in 5 seasons, which alone is enough to secure Larry Brown's place in the Hall of Fame. His courage and his character have already honored him that well. But most indicative of the kind of season Larry Brown had in 1973 was the fact that he led the NFL in touchdowns with 14, smashing over 8 times on the ground and 6 times with passes. But as much as Larry Brown's dedication and courageous abandon were a part of the Redskins season in 1973, so also was an unselfish commitment to teamwork that was the story of Sonny Jurgensen and Billy Kilmer. With Billy being the macho good guy and natural leader, and with Sonny being the slickest and smartest arm in the game, there had been some concern between them about who was number one, until Jurgensen ruptured his Achilles tendon in 1972. Then the burden clearly fell to Kilmer. But Jurgensen made a near miraculous recovery, and when he seemed content to accept the number 2 job backing up his friend Billy Kilmer, many suggested that he had grown complacent and lost his competitive edge. But there was nothing torpid about the torpedoes that Sonny cut loose on game days. And together, Sonny and Billy took turns sparking the Redskin attack through the early season. And then Billy sustained a painful ankle injury, and the Redskins had to depend on Sonny. Once as indestructible as Santa Claus, Jurgensen had become increasingly brittle, and now all of Washington collectively held its breath. But Sonny came through until late in the season with badly deteriorated cartilage he could no longer play. And Kilmer once again checked out of the hospital, and still suffering from a painful and mysterious stomach blockage, he led Washington into the playoffs against the Vikings. Jokingly, Kilmer and Jurgensen were called Mr. Hobble and Mr. Wobble by their coaches and teammates. But together they carried George Allen's Redskins to the playoffs, and together they inspired the spirit of teamwork and professionalism which characterized the Redskins in 1973. A spirit which aspires to nothing less than the capture of the Lombardi Grail in 1974, and to the achievement of the highest honor of super team.